Okay, it looks like attendee numbers are still going up, but stabilized. So we'll get started, I think. So thanks once again, everybody, for joining us for the latest European Road Freight Rate Benchmark webinar for Q3 2023. It's brought to you by IRU, Apply and Transport Intelligence. And today we'll also be joined by Marc Neyrand from Axxes to give a view on tolls, as well as that's going to be a very important topic. Obviously, as we move into the end of the year now, we're all getting ready for peak season, and we're looking at the road freight market and pricing trends. And one of the big topics for this quarter, of course, is the introduction of the new tolls in Germany as of December 1st. And obviously, that's going to have a marked increase on road freight operating costs in Germany and any freight transiting the country, and latterly will also affect other countries too. So today we'll be taking a bit of a deep dive into that, as well as also obviously assessing overall rate development across Europe as always, and diving into some key lanes as well. So today's session, as usual, will last about 30 minutes with the presentation, and then we'll have a 15-minute session for Q&A. As always, the Q&A function is available through Zoom, so do feel free throughout the webinar, if a question occurs to you, to enter them on the Q&A tool, and then at the end we'll do our best to get through as many questions as we possibly can. As always as well, the webinar recording will be shared with all attendees afterwards, and we'll also share a copy of the presentation and the report on which it's based with you. So please just be aware that that is available to you after the presentation. Okay, now we'll move on to our panelists now. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Michael Clover. I'm Head of Commercial Development at Transport Intelligence, and I'm your host today. And if you don't know Transport Intelligence, we are a market research company dedicated to the logistics industry and providing lots of data and insights about the future of the road freight market and how we see the market developing. So if you have any questions about how the market's changing, we're a great source for you. I'm also joined by my colleague, Nathaniel Donaldson, who's our data team lead and one of our economists at TI, and who's instrumental in putting the data and analysis for this report together. So welcome, Nathan.
Thanks, Michael. Pleasure to be here as well.
Additionally, we've also got Marianne Savoni on the call with us, as always. Marianne is Associate Director of Strategy and Market Intelligence at IRU, and she'll be sharing her views with us today. So welcome, Marianne, and can I just ask you to introduce IRU for those that don't know the organization yet?
Yeah, thank you very much, Michael. Good afternoon to everybody. So IRU is a World Road Transport Organization. We celebrate this year our 75th anniversary. So if you don't know us, we represent road transport industry as a whole. And we are counting more than 175 members. Our members are composed of road transport national associations, but also large international companies, so manufacturers, transport operators, service providers, shippers, energy suppliers in over more than 100 countries worldwide. And just to finish on what we do concretely, we advocate at regional and global levels. We also develop concrete solutions to facilitate international trade and transport. We certify and assess driver performance, and we develop through leadership and intelligence expertise on decarbonization, driver shortage, and digitalization matters. Thank you, Michael.
Great, thanks, Marianne. And additionally, we've got a guest panelist with us this quarter to help us deal with all the changes in tolls, and that's Marc Neyrand, the Chief Business Development Officer at Axxes. So welcome, Marc. Thanks for joining us for this session. And would you like to introduce yourself and Axxes for those that don't know the business?
Yes, thank you very much, Michael, and hello, everybody. So I'm Marc Neyrand from Axxes. Axxes is a French-based company. We are a toll service provider throughout Europe. We provide toll services to transport companies. So we are not in the B2C business, but in the B2B. We implement some interoperable solutions for our clients throughout Europe, because as you may know, there is no such thing as a proper standard for tolling in Europe. So each toll domain, each country needs some IT and specific adaptations. For the time being, we have roughly 50,000 clients and 300,000 onboard units, so vehicles driving with our tolling solutions. I'm very glad to be here.
Thanks, Marc. Thank you very much for that. Now, before I introduce our last panelist, Thomas, I must just read you our disclaimer at the bottom here as well. So we remind you that all discussions and statements made by participants on commercially or strategically sensitive information may fall within the scope of competition law and be considered as unlawful. We invite you to refrain from sharing any information of such nature or entering into any such discussions, including during breaks. And now I can also introduce our last panelist, Thomas Neyrand, Chief Executive Officer of Upply. Thanks for joining us as always, Thomas. Would you like to introduce Upply, and then we'll move on to a bit of a background on the methodology for the data as well?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. So Upply is a tech company dedicated to the supply chain industry, and we are providing many digital services to supply chain specialists, to buyers, or to financial people, from data regarding prices and the data that you will see just after, CO2 emissions, marketplace, or different tools regarding transportation in air freight, ocean freight, and road transport.
Brilliant. Thanks, Thomas. And now if we move on to the next slide, could you just give us a bit of background on methodology, particularly around the data we're going to be viewing throughout the presentation so people can understand?
Yeah, for sure. So this slide is just an introduction on all the data that you will see later on the slides. These data are based on, what is important is that they're based on transactional prices. What does it mean? It means that we at Upply, we do gather a lot of data directly from shippers, from our partners, from their transport management system, their ERP, their whatever the software. We collect invoices, transactional data, and many of these partners are in this the audience right now. So thanks to them. And this data allows us to have indexes and benchmarks. And today we will focus on FTL, so full truckloads, general cargo. We will have data with spots and contractual prices. The fuel will be included. We have also the ability to exclude the fuel, and many others type of transport, type of trucks from the reefer, bulk, dangerous goods are available. But today we will focus on FTL, general cargo, with a quite strong coverage over Europe.
Brilliant. Thank you, Thomas. So let's move on to our first content slide now. And this is the overall European benchmark showing both contract and spot rates. And so we'll talk about the overall trend here. We can see rates have been, growth in rates really has been declining over recent quarters. But Nathan, could you take us through what's happening now and any expectations for the future as well?
Yeah, sure. So in our previous webinar, we highlighted and identified the fact that the spot index had just dropped below the contract. We see that continue. So now spot's down for the fourth consecutive quarter, dropped 1.2 points quarter on quarter, and it's down to 125.4. And that now puts it down 14.8 points year on year. If we look at the contract market, that actually edged upwards 1.4 points quarter on quarter up to 128.1, and that puts it down just 0.4 points. So I guess the question really is, what does this mean? So what we have to consider here is that this index is an index with a base of quarter one, so the 1st of January 2017. And what this really means is that relative to their base level, so relative to their quarter one 2017, spot prices are now closer to their base level than contract rates. It doesn't guarantee that spot rates are now falling below contract rates across the continent, but we are seeing that in some lanes now, and it is becoming more likely than it was in the past. If we discuss what's really happened to get us into this situation, it's really the result of falling off short-term demand side pressure. So that's allowed the spot rates to continue to fall. I'm pulling them down in areas. Basically, we're seeing that inflation has left consumers poorer in real terms and demanding fewer goods. And then we also now have the effect of reduced global demand and reduced demand for manufacturing in Europe, which is reducing that industry side short-term pressure as well. But we're really seeing the contract rates remain elevated and also pushed up in areas. So this is a big thing to do with the cost base. So what we see now is that the costs remain elevated on previous years. We've got inflation, which has worked its way through the market, and then now has increased transport and storage prices, for example. So in Europe, if you look at transport and storage, so now up 17.6%. So that's wages in the transport and storage sector versus 2019 levels. If we look at vehicle maintenance, that's up 21.4% versus 2019. So an extremely elevated cost base that's actually continues to push the contract rates up. But we've got that short-term relief of demand-side pressure, which is freeing up capacity and bringing down the spot rates across Europe.
Yes, thanks. Thanks for that, Nathan. So let's explain the sort of current situation, really. Now, I didn't mention this at the start, but we would like to just run a poll, actually, to ask you, all of you, how you see rates changing in the next quarter, the next 3 months, really. So I'd like to invite you all to answer that poll, and we'll get a bit of a sense of your views on the markets from that, and then we can feed that into our discussion as well. So thank you. I can see that already had well over 200 answers now. So let's see if we can get to 500 plus with other participants. Looking like a fairly split decision at the moment, definitely erring towards rates increasing slightly, but pretty even. So I think that's indicating straight off the bat that there's a lot of uncertainty and volatility, of course, in the road freight market at the moment. What with the soft demand we're seeing, but with so many cost factors increasing. Right, looks like our response is coming in as slowing now. So I think I'll end the poll there. And then I'll share the results with you so you can see the outcome there. So yes, you'll see overall then that a few people, 9%, think that rates will increase substantially. Many of them probably thinking of the tolls increases that are coming in. 40% saying tolls will increase slightly, and then 26% for both decreasing slightly and remaining flat. Clearly, though, no one's really thinking that rates will be decreasing anytime soon. So that's actually sort of bucking the trend, really, of the last few quarters in terms of price growth. So that's interesting. Nathan, do you have any thoughts on that in relation to the outlook for rates?
Yeah, I say it would really vary. I think we're definitely seeing the slowing in the size and the speed of rate falls out on many lanes. So we can expect the especially in the spot market, the falls to be smaller. But we are seeing some economies that are still struggling. Inflation continues to erode, and especially manufacturing is still producing less demand, and it is leaving a lot of capacity left in the market. So I think we do have still some room for rate falls. And as we mentioned, that there's a steady and constant upward pressure on the contract rate. So I think we can still expect some flat and increases there.
So a complex situation, basically. But one of the things that will be driving costs in an upward direction, of course, is rates in the upward direction is the underlying costs. So the next slides really will dig into some of those factors, and we'll start off with fuel prices. And Marianne, if you could take us through this.
Yeah, sure. So just one clarification before I start. The diesel prices that you can see on the graph here are diesel prices at pump, including VAT. So as you can clearly see, the diesel prices at pump are currently in average close to 1.8 euro per liter globally in Europe. So which means up 14% in mid-October 23 versus June 23. So versus our last webinar. And these mid-October prices remain 18% above their January 2022 levels. So how can we explain that trend? First, and which is the main explanation, is the crude oil prices that have been increasing since June, and which is primarily because of the extended voluntary cuts of Saudi Arabia's crude oil production, and also with the increasing global demand driven by China. So our prices had surged to almost $90 per barrel in mid-September, which is a 25% increase versus June 23. And this after Saudi Arabia and Russia extended their voluntary production cuts through year-end and as crude oil and distillate inventories due to exceptionally low levels. So to try to give you some next month's expected trend, and we know that it is very difficult. When we look at the different sources, such as the US Energy Information Administration and the International Energy Agency, the Brent crude oil price will continue to rise in the coming months, and reflecting the expectations of tightening balance in the global oil markets. And if we have a little bit of price of forecast that we could take in account, is that the Brent price could amount to $95 per barrel in Q1 24, which potentially could lead to continuous pressure on diesel prices that you can see today on the graph. You may wonder what is the impact of the geopolitical situation in Middle East. So clearly, the sharp escalation in the Middle East and Israel, a region we know that is accounting for more than 1/3 of the world's seaborne oil trade, is putting the markets under pressure. So today, we don't see a direct impact on the physical supply, but the market will remain on turnhooks as the crisis unfolds, and we need to monitor the situation. And for the next webinar, we will see a little bit the update on this situation. So this is what we can say on this diesel prices trend.
Thanks, Marianne. Yes, unfolding situation which may lead to more price rises in the future, but unclear at the moment, really. So thanks for that. We'll move on now to another major cost factor, traditionally anyway, of labour and drivers in an operation. And we have this latest data from IRU on the forecast for 2024, actually, looking ahead to driver shortages there. So could you take us through this, please, Marianne?
Yeah, sure. Indeed, as you can see on the graph, the driver shortage is still remaining a key issue of the trucking industry. According to our latest driver shortage study, there were around 235,000 unfit truck driver jobs in Europe this year. Just to mention here, it is not only an European issue, but a global one. And when we consider the major economies in the world, we speak about 3 million of truck drivers' positions unfilled. So coming back to Europe, as you can contemplate on the slide, the shortage of truck drivers was slightly lower than a year ago, with 7% of truck driver positions remaining unfilled versus 9% in 22. Driver shortage decreased in all European countries studied, except in the Netherlands, where it remains stable. The primary reason of this decrease is not a better attractiveness of the profession. And we know that it is a structural issue. So the situation is not improving on this aspect. But as you can see with the yellow line on the graph, representing the freight volume, we can observe a stagnation of transport demand in Europe due to the falls in consumption driven by inflation together with limited wage growth. So when demand decreases or even stagnates, the shortage decreases at a higher speed because operators do not see a need to expand. So the difference in terms of shortage versus a scenario with increasing demand is high. That's why you can see this gap. Mm-hmm. And despite this temporary relief, the shortage of drivers still remains an issue because, as you can see, in 2024, the shortage is forecasted to increase again to reach 11% of unfilled jobs. And when we have a look, notably on the drivers of this increasing again driver shortage, it's mainly because unexpected transport demand growth. So just to finish, because I think it is an overview I think it is important to mention, is that when we do the exercise to forecast the driver shortage in 2028, the result is this one: 625,000 truck driver jobs could be unfilled. And this is mainly due to the fact that you will have a large wave of driver retirements expected in 5 to 10 years. And this is because of 1/3 of truck drivers in Europe are currently over 55 years. And so they will retire in 5 to 10 years. And the number of new entrants is still not sufficient to replace these leaving drivers.
Thanks, Marianne. Yeah, so situation's still likely to put upward pressure on rates and real pressure on capacity. And even though it does look as if it might be improving there, that really is just a function of the way the data for unfilled drivers is collected and the volume stagnating. So yeah, still a big issue for us to grapple with. So we'll now come on to another major issue for Q4, really, and I think what a lot of attention is on at the moment, looking at tolls and the price rises here. So I'll go on to give a little bit more background about those price increases in a moment. But first of all, I think it would be good to invite Marc to add his comments just in terms of the changes to tolling going on across Europe in the next few months and next couple of years as well. So Marc, could you just take us through that, please?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Excuse me. A few comments. So EETS stands for European Electronic Toll Service. As you know, this is not the standard, but the EU regulation that organizes our activity. What we can see as a trend in Europe is that new toll domains, new countries are implementing or are working on the implementation of tolling solutions. First of all, to fund the infrastructure maintenance, and secondly, to use what the Eurovignette directive planned for, i.e. The price signal. So there is a clear goal, a clear common goal in Europe to increase the cost of road transport in order to compensate for what they call the negative externalities, i.e. congestion, pollution, and so on. So I'm not defending this, I'm just stating a matter of fact. What we can see is that new countries are going to implement tolling systems. And for example, on this map, you don't see the Netherlands, but the Netherlands are actively working on the implementation of a satellite-based tolling system comparable to the one in Germany or in Belgium. And they are planning to do so in 2026. And it's only an example. Lithuania as well is working on it, and many other countries. So this is something I think that the industry has to take into account for the future. We will try to provide the IRU with the maximum information as we can get it in terms of planning of new toll domains.
Thank you, Marc. Yeah, so there's lots of obviously changes coming into tolls as we're aware. Of course, we expect basically between December 1st, 2023, the tolls to first be introduced in Germany and then shortly after in Austria. But then we expect those major changes to come into force across much of Central and Eastern Europe and parts of Scandinavia as well, up to 2025, by which point it must be implemented, I think Marc said. So the view as what's going on in Germany at the moment shows us what might be in store across those other parts of Europe over the next few years. And I think, just worth explaining that as the CO2 sort of tax comes in, we're expecting that cost burden to be about 200 euros per ton of CO2. And that's coming in on trucks over 7.5 tons in Germany in December, and then in July that'll be over 3.5 tons. So it's going to affect a large number of vehicles across fleets. So just to give you some indication really of the scale of that, and we'll have a graphic for this a bit later on, but that's moving tolls as a share of the overall cost of operating a truck from about 10, 11, 12% up to about 20%. Of the overall cost burden. And we, TI, played out an example looking at a fleet of about 130 trucks operating in Germany or cross-border freight through Germany. And the cost base on a month for that is likely to be about 200,000 euros. And if you apply this new scenario, that's nearly doubling really to around 400,000 euros per month. So we are talking about a huge cost increase here. Now, a lot of road freight operators say that have no choice, especially in a year where there's so many company failures, there's so little margin in the market. They will have no choice, but to pass that cost on to shippers. So we expect to have that to have a very pronounced effect on price rises as it comes into force, and there'll be a lot of volatility in the market as that plays out. But we're expecting quite a strong impact on rates rather than them being absorbed by operators. So hopefully that sets the scene, and the panelists will talk a little bit more about that as we move into the slides on individual lanes as well, many of which involve Germany. And later on, we'll have a slide also talking specifically about German domestic rates as well. So on our first slide here on an individual lane, we're looking at Madrid to Paris. And Thomas is going to just take us through this trend.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. And I will just start by answering some questions because they are coming back. Yes, the slides will be sent to you after the webinar, and yet this is recorded. You will find the replay directly on YouTube. And here on the following slides, this will be directly linked to some data, point to point, country to country, or within certain countries. Here again, this is all included, meaning the fuel is included, meaning the tool is included, and we will certainly see the increase in the forthcoming months is because the tool parts, the increase will happen quite shortly as we just show it. From France to Spain, if we have a quick look on this part over there, we see on the top lane, the pink one, decrease in price, the spots between Madrid to Paris. So this is the only decrease that we have on this corridor. The prices of spots were very, very high in Q2 and Q3 2022. They started to decrease, and this is the fourth time in a row that they are decreasing. But as you can see, the decrease is slightly less right now. When we have a look at the other one, the contract, either from Paris to Madrid or Madrid to Paris, here there is a clear stabilization of the cost of the increase. There is no more increase. We are in a stabilization for the 2-3 past quarters. And if we try to look at that, first, the decrease in price for the spot one seems clearly linked to the decrease in demand in France. Quarter from quarter, we have a decrease of 1.3% of the consumption in France. And if we have a look directly on the consumption of food, this is minus 7.6%. So this is a huge decrease quarter to quarter on food. And we know that France is importing a lot of food from Spain. So it can explain a part of that. And about the stabilization, still this is linked to what we have said previously. The demand is weak in many countries in Europe, and this is the case for France and Spain. But costs are high and costs are increasing. Fuel is increasing. And so we won't see a sharp decrease. We have seen a first decrease, and now it's more stabilization. And I think this is more regulation, let's say, or coming back to a high level. If we look at these prices, this is still about 20% higher than previous to the COVID crisis.
Thank you, Thomas. Yes, and for sharing that forward-looking outlook as well. So we're moving now on to Poland, Germany. So actually Warsaw, Duisburg, this lane. Nathan, could you take us through the trend here?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, looking at the rates fell across the board on this lane. On the spot market, in the head haul over to Duisburg, the spot rate dropped 6.4% quarter on quarter, and it now sits down 20.5% year on year. The contract rate fell a more modest 2.4% and now sits down 5.5% year on year. Over onto the back haul, so going towards back towards Warsaw, the spot fell 4.9% quarter on quarter, now down 14.2% year on year, and the contract fell 2.7% quarter on quarter and is now 5.1% down year on year. So during the back haul, on the head haul, during quarter three on the head haul, the spot rates averaged just 0.5% more than the contract rates. And actually, we've seen it evidence from September that spot rates drop below the contract rate, and that's in euro terms this time. So it's one of those lanes where we're not seeing it across the board, but we are seeing the spot drop below the contract in some areas. In terms of market pressure, why is this happening? We've got the German economy that's still seeing falling activity. Demand continues to fall for road freight, and this is resulting in excess capacity. So we've now got manufacturing, which is 6.8 points below 2019 levels, fell another 1.7 points in quarter three. Car production, while recovering across the continent, is really struggling in Germany. So it fell 5.5 points in quarter three and is 13.3 points below 2019 levels. So we've got that serious drop in demand, especially on historic levels, but it's continuing to drop in Germany. It's freeing up the capacity, and it's allowing further spot falls. which we can expect. Overall, the picture in Poland is struggling more in terms of its exposure to other markets, but the long-term growth in Poland for demand from consumers and industry is quite strong. This is one of those lanes where we're definitely going to see the effect of tolls in the Lewis numbers after the start of December, and it's been heavily affected by costs. But the demand has dropped off so much that we're seeing falls in both markets, even while costs continue to push up the supply side pressures.
And it's been an interesting lane to watch then, as you know, not really expecting a recovery in German demand anytime soon. Those costs going up, we'll see how that plays out too. Okay, so we're going to our last sort of major lane here that we cover every time. This is France, Germany, Duisburg, Lille. Marianne, would you take us through this one?
Yeah, sure. So what we can see here, so as you can see on the head wall to Lille, you have the contract rate that fell on an average of 677 euro down, 1.2% quarter on quarter and 7.1% year on year. And the spot rates average 713 euro down, 2.1% quarter on quarter and 12.8% year on year. And on the backhaul route from Lille to Duisburg, contract rates sat at 491 euro, so down 2.6% quarter on quarter and 1% year on year. And the spot prices sat at 532 euro, so down 0.3% quarter on quarter and 10.9% year on year. So how can we understand this trend? On the head haul into France, the speed of decline for rates had slowed as French economy is set to grow modestly in 2024. And when we notably look at the data that we have available from the French Institute of Statistics, we can see that there is a 0.9% quarter on quarter on growth on the French household expenditure, which is expected, which is remaining down 1.3% year on year. And just to finish on the French side, the total French production saw no overall volume change in Q3 and sits up just 0.7 points year on year, but 3.6 points below 21. So as a result, France rates appear to be normalizing somewhat with reduced volatility as a result of stable French demand at new lower levels. On the backhaul, as you can see, contract rates dropped 2.6%, which is reflecting a continued decline in the long-term output expectations of the German economy. And the indicators across the board point a stagnating German economy, which is struggling in recession. And the German production fell 1.7 points quarter on quarter, and even vehicle production fell 5.5 points quarter on quarter. So as a result, as you can see, the both spot and contract rates toward Germany have the potential to fall further as the projected volume capacity required into Germany continues to decline and free up market capacity. In the short term, fuel, labor, and tolls are set to push the cost base up further. And we are receiving today the questions on the impact, notably in Germany, of the CO2 tolling taxation. As we saw already earlier in the presentation, diesel prices alone increased, and in France they increased by 4.6% versus Q2 23 and by 7.2% in Germany. And also the Q2 figures show that the wages in the transport and storage sector are up 6.5% year on year in France. Michael will give you more inputs on the aspect of the end of the webinar on the CO2 tolling impact, notably in Germany. But starting from the 1st December of 23 in Germany, indeed, you will have the implementation of the new CO2 taxation. And all the other EU member states that are not exempted by existing concessions are expected to also implement the Eurovignette Directive on CO2 tolling by March 25 at the latest.
Yes, thanks very much, Marianne. So we should see maybe a potential reversal of the recent trend here in terms of price development. Now, we're looking particularly in this slide here at Poland. Lots of interesting trends on the international lanes from Poland. So Nathan, I'm afraid we're a little short on time now, so you might have to focus mostly on what's driving this and just explain why we picked Poland. But if you would take us through it briefly, that would be great.
So in terms of rates, we're seeing that the spot rates are falling, contract rates are rising. Generally, in terms of the market pressures, it's similar to what I mentioned the Warsaw-Duisburg lane. Poland is really highly exposed to the other European economies, especially Germany. So the fall in manufacturing is resulting in falling demand for Polish intermediate and capital goods. So that's really affecting this reduced demand and opened up the capacity and allowed for more supply side competition. So that's really allowed rates to drop back down. But Polish international lanes do tend to be dominated by Polish carriers. And now Polish carriers, Poland has faced really high inflation, and we're seeing this work through the market. So now an example being transport and storage sector wages now nearly 60% higher than the 2019 level. We've got maintenance costs that are 43.3% higher than their 2019 level. So we've got significantly increased cost base for the Polish carriers, and that's keeping costs elevated. Sorry, it's keeping contract rates elevated, but exposure to struggling economies is bringing the spot down.
Okay, thank you, Nathan. Very interesting. All right, and now move on to our last sort of rate slide. This is an index looking at domestic rates in Germany, highlighting, or in anticipation of the toll changes, I should say, really. But Thomas, could you just take us through what's happening here?
Yeah, I will try to add some comments. We have talked about Germany just as previously, but clearly Germany is the segment of Europe if we're looking at from an economical point of view. The fall that we see over there is quite striking. This is linked for sure with the retail trade that are falling 2.3 points quarter to quarter right now. If we're looking at the food sales, this is down by 5.3% year on year. So clearly the internal German demand is decreasing a lot, and this has a direct impact on the demand of transportation within Germany. This is linked also with the inflation for sure, with an increase of the energy rate of more than 180% regarding the energy cost of building and the industrial part. So everything is linked with that directly in what we have talked before. But if we are looking at the outlook, prices are still high, still higher than in 2020 or 2021, and we won't see them going down and down, because you will see just later with the tool. This is the case also with the increase of labor cost, the increase of the cost of owning a truck, of maintaining a truck, the fuel part. So we think that we are reaching kind of level that is more normal for the time being regarding the demand and offer aspects.
Yes, thank you, Thomas. So yeah, interesting situation in Germany really, with the slackening demand, so much exposure to energy prices in the manufacturing economy in Germany, and then obviously seeing these cost increases as well for fuel, for labor, and now especially for tolls. And this next slide really just is there to illustrate the difference in the structure that we're expecting to see in Germany once the toll increases are in play. Actually, this data is drawn from CNR. And it looks at the structure of an overall road freight operation by cost group. So traditionally, of course, dominated by fuel and driver costs as the most important two components, but actually, or two individual components. But actually, after the toll increases, tolls will be nearly as large as those two areas. So this will be the increase. We expect to go from 12 to 20% in total as a share of German price increases. And you've got to bear in mind that that's also with fuel costs and driver costs increasing at the same time in the inflationary environment. So that increase is of a bigger pie anyway. So it's quite a big change there. And obviously we then expect that to have the impact on the German market as well. And the timing, of course, for the German economy of transport costs increasing substantially as a result of those toll increases is not is not great, as the economy is already struggling. But you know, we should see that implemented as well. So we've certainly watched that space as December comes around and see the tolls being increased. And obviously, in the next quarter, we should be able to see some of the effects of that coming in from the latest data as Q4 comes to a close. So anyway, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. We've overrun slightly by 10 minutes or so, but we've still got time for some questions. So we'll now move on to our Q&A session. I can see that we've already got a good number of questions already. And I know that the team have been answering, or panelists have been answering some of those as we've gone through. But please do add any further questions that you have to the Q&A tool now, and we'll try and answer as many as we can. I guess we usually start maybe with some more technical questions that come through during the webinar. So Thomas, I don't know if you've noticed any more sort of technical questions about data that you'd like to respond to first of all.
Yes. So once again, this is data on general cargo. So we don't talk here about reefer parts, chemicals, or other type of goods. We do have data on this kind of goods at Upply, but here we are focusing on full truckload general cargo. One other comment is that the first slide was an index based in 2017. So this is important because an index is 100 based, and then there is the evolution. All the rest is the cost, the average cost for one trip from origin destination in euro, including all additional costs. So fuel is included, toll is included, and everything is included in that. And we didn't mention it, but the S is for spots, the C is for contract, and on all the slides, this was like that.
Yes, thank you, Thomas. Very, very important to be aware of that. Yeah, obviously with the index as well, for the overall benchmark, we're showing price change there. So we've got a couple of questions about that. So it might be helpful as well, just Nathan, if you could explain how that index works and what it shows when the contract index rate is lower than or the spot rate is lower than the contract rate, for instance.
Sure. So what we're seeing on this index is all the index figures are where prices are relative to 2017 Q1. So what that means is if we look in the spot market, just the spot market, what is that price relative to the spot market's price in 2017 Q1? So it can be a bit confusing because you might expect if the spot index is below the contract index, that would mean in euro terms for your freight, you would expect it to be cheaper. It's not necessarily what we're saying, but it does vastly increase the likelihood of that happening. But what it really means is that if we look at the trend over that 5-year period, now we're seeing that if it drops below, it means that the spot is moving closer to its 2017 Q1 level than the contract. So I do understand that is a bit confusing. But basically, we're showing the different directions, the different trends that they're heading in. But if you do look at the actual lane level data, you are now going to see some actual euro terms falls below. And we can see that in the lane that I mentioned between Warsaw and Duisburg. If you look at the source data, you will see it drop below, especially in September.
Okay, thanks for that, Nathan. Some other questions here about the toll prices and actually trying to look at asking from Kenny Dobson, actually, is there a toll increase on the toll increases? Are there any reference tables that show a calculation increase at percentage level for each country impacted? At TI, we haven't done calculations for all the countries, and the toll increases yet. It's not quite clear exactly when they'll be implemented and what impact they'll have. So we will work through that over the next couple of years, but we do have a table showing the impact of the toll increases on different classes of vehicle once the December tolls come in, and then again for when the July tolls on the lighter vehicles come in as well. So do get in touch with us if you'd like to have a look at that. That is already available. And on the subject of tolls as well, we've also had a question from Alessandro Esposito saying, is there still a possibility that the German government decides to come back on this decision? I mean, not totally, but just regarding a possible reduction, reading other documents that the toll increase would looking at maybe something like 10% more of an increase to try and avoid a recession last year. So there's been a lot of talk about there being some sort of policy change from the German government, and obviously in Germany, lots of concern about the impact on the economy. Marianne, I can see you've put your hand up for that question. So would you like to answer that?
Yeah, just to mention that in Germany, so 2 months were only taken for the implementation, so it was quite fast. What we are thinking that we need to monitor exactly what is going to happen following the implementation, which is in 3 weeks, so the 1st of December, to see how it is going to be implemented and what are going to be the direct impacts or consequences that we are going to see on the ground in terms of the cost increase and the impact on the transport demand and the flows. Indeed, depending on that, I think that the government maybe should maybe review or rediscuss different aspects, I think, in terms of implementation. But again, this is a revision of the Eurovignette directive, meaning in the sense that all the countries, most of the countries in Europe that are concerned need to implement this taxation by 2025 at the latest. And so depending on the countries, the type or the level of implementation is going to be quite different. So we need to monitor the situation in Germany first and to see whether there's going to be maybe some adjustments that are going to be done by the government. And let's see what is going to happen also with the other countries, notably Austria, which is the next one in the list, and the other ones, notably Poland or Czech Republic.
Thank you, Marianne. There's also just another question, which I see you've also put your hands up on, tolls, just asking about whether or not it will apply only to diesel vehicles, but also to vehicles of other types, and do specify the different types of different classes of vehicles and the effects, which are slightly different. But would you like to answer that one as well, Marianne?
Yeah, very briefly. In the case of Germany, because I think it is the first example to take in account for this type of answer. The vast majority of vehicles will fall into the CO2 emission class 1. And the class 1, it is the most expensive one. It means all the vehicles between Euro 0 and Euro 5 classes, all Euro 6 vehicles first registered before July 2019, and the most Euro 6 vehicles first registered after July 2019. And exempted electrical trucks and hydrogen vehicles.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes. So hopefully that makes things a little clearer, but obviously there is a fair bit of complexity to that as well. Okay, so we had some more questions coming in recently here, looking at the sort of overall trend that we're expecting to see in terms of increases on that as well. So just, yes, I think earlier we did say that we thought that it was basically going to be doubling toll costs so with the CO2 toll. So I think we've sort of answered that one. There's a question here on which I think is quite an interesting one, and I had lots of discussions with various shippers about this as well, that obviously as prices in road freight have been or expected to increase with the tolls, should we expect a shift towards rail or different modal choices, which, very interesting idea. Obviously, it depends a bit about where how your network is spread over Europe and how it relates to rail networks and so on. But I'm not sure if anyone would like to come back and answer on that one. Would you like to give a view as to the impact you expect to be on modal choice, Thomas, of the tolls coming in? Anything to say on that?
Yes, for sure. Regarding the train or the multimodal part in train, the question is good, and we can put also the sea part or the nearshoring in that. Regarding train, what we have seen in 2023 is a decrease of volume in train, mainly due, it depends on the country, but in many countries we had some operational issues, plus the cost of the energy, the electricity that was very, very high, and that is still very high. So we have, on one side, we have the toll that is increasing for road transportation with the fuel that is increasing. On the other side, we have still operational issue on the train with the cost of electricity that is increasing also. So the clear report between the clear balance between multimodal part is not that clear yet. and we need to get that to have a look at that on a closer future.
Thanks, Thomas. Maybe another sort of more general question, but we've had a question here saying, do you see the reefer cargo rates following the same evolution as contract and spot rates, I suppose, for general cargo that we're talking about here? Do you have a view on that, Thomas?
Yeah, once again, it's quite complex to have a global view on reefer because it's very specific on certain countries, and certain countries are more impacted than others. We see clearly at the European level a correlation between a reefer and general cargo. But if we have a look at certain countries, Spain, Italy, for instance, that are using the reefer part for food exports, the impact of the food is quite huge. We have talked about France that has a decrease of about 12 or 15% year on year in the consumption of goods and on food, sorry. So for sure, this has a clear direct impact on that compared to other industrial goods where the demand is less affected.
Thank you, Thomas. Yes. And there's another question here asking whether or not, in general terms, does inflation have a reverse correlation with road freight rates? I suppose we have been talking a lot about how inflation is reducing demand, but a little more complex, multifactorial than that, unfortunately. But Nathan, would you like to tackle that question about the correlation between inflation and freight rates?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I guess we have to consider both. Now we see the immediate effect of inflation. Well, the short-term effects of inflation, which is more going to affect the demand side, especially consumers. We're now also seeing the lagged effect of inflation. So it's tricky to give a direct response, because we're now seeing a lagged effect of inflation, which has pushed through higher costs, and now on the supply side has increased the cost base. So I think we have to see it from both sides. In the short term, the fall off of inflation should have the inverse effect. So we should see the fall in the spot rates slow. It should slow the fall of short-term demand. But we must consider the long term, and the long term of the prolonged experience of inflation. That 12 months is still going to push through the system. It's still going to push through increased cost bases. It's continuing to add wage pressure as people are poorer and now are expecting higher wages. So short term, yes, inverse, but over the long term, it's still got an upwards effect.
Okay, thanks, Nathan. So I guess we've got an endless string of questions here, but I think we'll take two more. The first one maybe just on some of the driver shortages questions around the data there. So I think the MTKM measure is basically showing million ton kilometers. For the person who asked about that. But Marianne, I can see you're actually maybe typing an answer to this anyway, but it'd be good for everyone to hear as well. So I'll ask you this question, and then I'll maybe move on to see if Marc has any questions on the tolls he'd like to come back on before we finish. But this question on driver shortages is asking, how is the market looking to solve the driver shortage crisis? Bringing in drivers from non-European countries is difficult with visas and immigration laws and so on. So what kind of impact does that have on the European community, society, I suppose? Would you like to answer that one, Marianne?
Yeah, sure. From a legislative point of view, there is a revision of the EU driving license directive, which is happening at the end of the year, and this offers a window of opportunity to facilitate the access to the profession, and notably for the non-EU drivers, by facilitating the access to the profession with the recognition of the foreign CPCs of countries that have similar standards to Europe. And the other angle that the European Commission is still working on is to reduce the minimum age to access the profession. IRU Notary is asking for a 17 years minimum age accompanied driving to allow very young drivers to already take the road before 18 in the case they are accompanied. So this is something which is very important to be monitored, because politically speaking, this is now. And so let's see if there are then opportunities for some drivers from different countries around Europe to be able to enter the profession and then to compensate in a way the gap and to fill in the gap.
Okay, thank you, Marianne. Okay, well, I think we'll end with you, Marc. Obviously, there've been loads of questions on tolls throughout this. We've mostly answered them in the way on thinking about the impact on road freight pricing. But is there any of those questions you'd like to answer? Any other comments you'd like to make on the toll changes that are upcoming?
Yes, just maybe about Germany. We don't know what will be the political outcome of the situation. For the time being, the legislation has been voted at the parliament level, so it's going to be applied. And let's be clear, the administration is very active on applying the new CO2 pricing on December the 1st. And we know that more or less 95% of the trucks are going to pay for the highest class. The increase is very important in Germany. It's less important in Austria, starting on January the 1st. And we just heard that the Czech Republic is contemplating an implementation of CO2 as well in the course of next year, but I can't be more accurate, I'm sorry. And just bear in mind as well that besides the CO2 pricing, you will have the normal toll increases in different countries, for example, in France on February the 1st, but certainly in Belgium as well, in July, and so on. So every country have their own timetable for those toll increases, which is difficult for us to put together everything on the table.
Yeah, so it's complex with all those different changes coming in at different times. And I guess that's worth remembering as well, that all the usual increases will go through, and obviously with inflation as it is, substantial. So there's that sort of underlying cost uptick as well as this substantial change that we're expecting to see over the next couple of years. Great. Well, thank you very much to all our panelists today. Thank you, Nathan, Marianne, Marc, especially for joining us as our guest panelists today, and Thomas as well. If you have other questions, there are 45 we still haven't answered on the Q&A tool, unfortunately, just yet. But if you have other questions, please do get in touch with us. With the details on the screen here, we'll be very happy to continue the conversation with you. Otherwise, thanks again to the panelists, and thank you to all of you for joining today. We had over 500 on the call, which is great to see. And we look forward to seeing you all on the next webinar. So thank you and goodbye.